Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic ReCon Testimonies from Reverts and Converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. And before I get into this week's guest, I want to remind you to subscribe and also make sure that you tell others about the podcast as well as the YouTube show and comment as well. This week's guest is Deacon Dave Imhof, who is a good friend of my good friend, Dave Fortin, who has been on this show. And I'm going to mention both of these gentlemen. They're on the East Coast doing a lot of work. I know, Deacon Dave, you're going to get into the diaconate and the formation there, but what you're doing for the church is very notable, and what you do to help Dave in producing his show. So if you have not heard of this podcast, that's Along the Way. I highly recommend it. Fantastic guests, fantastic production. Please check it out when you get a chance. And I just wanted to note just how important you gentlemen are to the church, and you both inspire me. I've only spoken to you, Deacon Dave, maybe once or twice on his show, but just really, really appreciate what you do. So welcome to the show, first of all.
Thank you, Eddie.
It's good to see you. I wonder if you can take people to your childhood and maybe give an overview of what it was like to be raised as a Catholic, because that's not the case for a lot of people that come on the show, but in your case it is.
Oh yeah. So I was born into a large Catholic family. I have six brothers, no sisters. And my parents were very faithful. And I was baptized, I think, 13 days. I did the math recently, 13 days after I was born. So, they took care of that right away. And then as I grew up in the family, it's Staten Island, New York. It's part of New York City. I went to Catholic school, grade, kindergarten through high school, and we went to church all the time. We were expected to go to church, but somehow I never really got that strong faith. I think I understood a lot of stuff with the faith, but I was pretty. The term I like to use is lukewarm. And we know what Jesus tells us about being lukewarm. He spits us out. So I didn't wasn't a real strong faith, and then when I had some crises in my life, probably the most significant one is when my mother passed away when I was 14 years old, and I didn't, I understood what was going on at the time. Of course, I was 14. What's going on. You're at the age of reason. Beyond that. But I really could not understand why God would take my mother. My mother was so important to me. I was her favorite. She was just loving and caring, and I was devastated. And anyway, then once I finished high school, I moved on. I got away. My father remarried to Sophie, and one of the ways I like to describe, I can't call Sophie like the evil stepmother, but she wasn't a real loving mother either. I couldn't describe her as a loving mother. She was kind of going through the motions too. So anyway, I got away from home when I graduated high school, went to engineering college in Rochester Institute of Technology, where typically college stuff, you stray even further from into some sinful, activities, etc. So, yeah. How am I doing so far, Eddie? Is this kind of what you're looking at?
I was going to ask you if, when you think back to the education the catechesis that was received. Do you remember anything about that? Because um, a lot of people that say lukewarm, they're also saying that they either weren't paying attention, in my case, I believe, when you're receiving catechesis, or it wasn't strong. There wasn't a call to really live your faith. Do you remember what that was like leading up to? Because all of a sudden you're in college, and I just wonder how much of the faith was even retained at that point.
Yeah, I think it wasn't I didn't pay attention or anything like that. I think I was a fairly good student. And I think it was more they taught the nuts and bolts, of our faith, scriptures, the stories and things like that. What never came across, and maybe as you said, lived the faith. I never at in those young years never had a uh, relationship with God, a relationship with Jesus Christ. You'd go up and receive communion, body of Christ, amen. I didn't really have an understanding that I was receiving Jesus Christ, in that Eucharist. So it was more not living. I think the catechesis, did all I think the specifics, but it never got my heart. And yeah, so
Yeah, no,
that
that's helpful. So then you're in college, and you're like so many of us, distracted. And do you remember anything in college that stood out to you? Were there any experiences? First of all, did you stop going to mass? Because that's another common experience.
I didn't totally stop going, but I wasn't consistent. Uh, they did have a mass on campus, so yeah, I started getting into drinking, and we'd go out Friday, Saturday night, especially Saturday nights, and frequently I was hungover Sunday morning, and I wasn't in any position or shape to be going to mass. So those things, that type of stuff would happen. Yeah. So yeah.
So then when you're post college, I don't know when you got married. How old were you when you got married?
I was 22. Yeah. So I met my wife like last year in college. And when I was 22, maybe I was 23 when I got married a year after we graduated. Uh, and yeah, so
Was it
uh,
understood
it,
that was it Catholic, a Catholic?
yeah,
And that's what I'm
yeah,
getting at. Like, in other words,
yeah.
were you still firm enough to say, you know what, we're gonna have a Catholic wedding, and once you were married, like, what I'm curious about is it usually follows that if a person is kind of, I don't know, lukewarm, that when they get married and they start having children, that they're not necessarily going to commit to a weekly schedule. But maybe it was different. I wanted to know what your experience was.
Yeah, well, actually, my wife was very much stronger in the faith than I was. She enjoyed the on campus mass. They had a nice choir or folk group that she participated in. She now still plays the guitar and sings and whatnot, and she has been in the choir here. So that was kind of a draw for her, and she kind of drew me back into the faith um, more strongly. She lived more her faith than I did, or at the time. There was never a question of not marrying in the Catholic Church. And in recollection, also we I don't recall, strong pre-Cana. I think we met with her pastor once, maybe
Mhm.
twice. I don't, so it wasn't that strong. But we did follow through and bring out our kids up in the faith. They got all the sacraments. We would go to mass more frequently, but still not every week. Still, I was not, 100% dialed into our faith at that point. And when I was a young adult and a young parent, and our children were young. My wife would sing in the choir at the parish we went to, and I would sit in the pews with our two boys, and it was all about keeping them in line. And maybe I was somewhat embarrassed if they were, noisy or, acting out. And, that was more my worry while I was there, as opposed to what was going on in the mass. So that's kind of where my mindset was, so.
Great. That's actually the first time I've heard someone say that, but that's been my personal experience for quite a while, where I'm actively, I'd say, working on it, which is to say, I'm so preoccupied with the kids that I have no idea what's being said sometimes. And no, that's really helpful to hear that, because I know that there are a lot of other parents that deal with the same thing.
Just jumping to today, real quick, is
Yeah.
the mass is so beautiful. It's so scriptural. If you pay attention, there's so much you can get out of the mass, and it's not the same mass every day. There's different prayers that are depending on the day, the year, the season, and etc. And of course, the readings are always different. It's just so beautiful. You pay attention. It really is amazing, and it really is very helpful. So, but I wasn't doing it back then.
Yeah.
I was,
Yeah.
Quiet. Shh.
Yeah.
Do I have to sit between you? And stuff like that.
So you get married. How long was it before? What was that moment where you felt like, okay, maybe I'm not lukewarm? Now, to be clear, it's not as if when you're lukewarm, you're necessarily aware of it. Sometimes it takes a moment to then look back and say, oh my gosh, I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just going through the motions or whatever. Is any of that, did you have a moment that kind of stood out, or any type of retreat or anything that you may have participated in that would have shown you that?
Yeah, it was a gradual thing. I wouldn't say there's a specific moment. There's some things that did occur. Our parish started perpetual adoration, 24/7 perpetual adoration, and we were going to mass more consistently at that point, because my son was in formation of for confirmation. He's preparing for confirmation. So, and he had to like take notes for the homily and things like that at mass. So anyway, we're going, and after mass one day, or a bunch of times, they were talking about, hey, we need people to commit to certain hours during the week to cover the 24/7 adoration. My wife really encouraged me to do that. So we both decided to do that. And to me, that was probably the most important step that I took. I didn't know it at the time, but that's how mostly I got this, started to develop this relationship with Jesus. You spend consistent time, week after week, in that chapel with Jesus, all by yourself. I did hours in the middle of the night, and that was the amazing thing. I did have an event that occurred. I won't swear that this is, I wasn't dreaming, let's put it that way. But at one point I had, it was either a dream or it happened. I had a vision of Jesus in this, bright, almost like transfiguration type image. And he came and sat down right next to me in the chapel. and opened a book, which I interpret to be the Bible. And the message I got from that was that, Dave, you gotta read the Bible more and more often and consistently. So that was a big event that had occurred, and it continued, weekly adoration. And as I went, more and more, you spend more time with our Lord and Savior, and it just gets, your relationship just gets solidified and improved. And then other things started to happen. I got invited to an Acts retreat. I don't know if Dave has talked about Acts retreats in the past, but Acts retreat it's a weekend retreat. It's an acronym, adoration. It focuses on the themes of adoration, community, theology, and service. And community being a real important thing for me as well. That's where I started to develop a strong faithful Catholic community of initially men, because it's a men's retreat and separately women's retreats. But in time, my community would grow to include, many of the women that would go on these retreats. And that was another, I'll say, turning point or important point in my conversion, or awakening.
Sure.
So
That's
any
awesome. No,
yeah.
that's awesome. Had you gone to adoration before committing to the perpetual adoration? Did you know what you were signing up for?
Well, we did adoration when I was a child. I think it was mostly during Lent, or the Holy Week probably was. And I was an altar boy, and I was assigned. I had to be there and sit, on the altar or something like that. So I've been to it, but I really didn't. Yeah, I really didn't have an understanding of what it was. So when I was committing to it, yeah, I didn't. It wasn't a great understanding in my mind. I'm an adult. I don't know how old I was, 40, 45 years at the time, 40 years maybe. It's a little embarrassing to say how much I didn't really understand about our faith. But yeah, I didn't have a good understanding at that time.
That's good. After the Acts retreat and following, would you say that the next big thing was related to the call to the diaconate? And if so, can you speak to what that was like? Because you talk about radically different experiences as men that I know that have been called to the diaconate.
Yeah, I think the next step was not a call to the diaconate. It was I'll say a call to service, and that's another fruit from the Acts retreat. The S being service. Um, I started to get real involved with the parish, the various things in the parish. I was an extraordinary Eucharistic minister. I began to teach religious education, which, by the way, in and of itself, you had to learn what the faith is about to be able to teach it. So that was a good element. I was a member of the parish council for many years, and even served as the president for our parish. And so I started getting into these, a lot of service. Knights of Columbus was obviously the other big thing, and very service oriented. Charity being their first principle, love, helping others, helping your community, etc. So that service, I think, was very important in my in the next step that would come, and that is the call to the diaconate. I'll tell you the story quickly. Is One day after mass, a lady comes up to me who I knew. She's one of these ladies who were in my Acts community, and she says to me, "Oh, you would make a good deacon." And I kind of ignored her. "Oh, thank you very much. It's very kind of you, etc." And I didn't act on it. And I don't know the exact timing, but separately, I began to do spiritual reflection. Father Ron was my spiritual director at the time, and it was a year or two that I was with him, and meet monthly. And he would, at one point, he said, "Dave, you've got a real servant's heart. Uh, you should consider being a deacon." And that's what I recognize as the call, is from Father Ron. Of course, I'm sure God called me through this other lady that I talked about, but I wasn't aware enough or smart enough or humble enough to hear it. And so when a priest asks you to do something, to pray about a call like that, it carries a lot more weight. And so I did start to pray about it, and it was about a year and a half, 2 years later that the class started, the formation. It's a 5-year formation. It varies from diocese to diocese, but for the most part, it's five. It's in that order of 5 years. We do a year of discernment, where we did the Ignatius spiritual exercises, which was fantastic for me. And then 4 years of academic or intellectual formation, as well as you do ministry services as you go, and other, I'll say, practicum things. What are you going to have to do when you serve at mass, and things like that, more logistical or stuff like that. But anyway, that was obviously a great experience. Did a lot for me. In the early stages of that time, I retired from my 38 years or so of aerospace industry work, which gave me more time to focus on my formation. I would do a lot of things like used a lot of resources that were available, a lot of podcasts. Bishop Barron, I think it was no, it was always Bishop Barron at the time. Listened to a lot of his stuff, and Father Mike, et cetera, et cetera. I would be consuming as much Catholic material that I could get my hands on, and yeah, and with the process of formation, both the candidate and the diocese discerns if this is in fact a call from God. That's really, and you do it throughout the whole process, all the way up to, they say, when the bishop lays his hands on your head. So, which can be a little scary thing, is you go through all this work and preparing and up, no, but so
Oh, that's
yeah, and
fantastic. That's
yeah.
fantastic. So how does the church, if you can speak to that, when you're saying the church is also discerning, just those that are running the program are just observing and making sure that the fit is there, and that the ability to I guess be available is there. What is it when you're
Yeah,
talking about church discerning?
yeah,
What does that speak to? Go ahead.
yeah. Well, there's in our diocese a couple positions. There's the um, uh, director of deacons in our diocese, but also our there's someone in charge. His name was Deacon Ben. He was in charge of our formation. So they're kind of keeping an eye on it. We're required to go through spiritual direction throughout our formation, and continue on as now ordained. But I'll say the main, I think, mechanism was there's a diaconate board in the diocese that we would have to meet several times throughout the process before we even became a candidate. We had to meet many times, and most of the times we had to bring our wives. One of the things they were very cautious of is, deacons can be married only before they're ordained,
Yep.
and matrimony is a sacrament. Ordination is a sacrament. Holy orders, sacrament, both sacraments. they didn't want to break one sacrament, your marriage, for the sake of some, serving the church as a deacon in this case. So they were very spent a lot of time making sure that my wife and all the other deacons that or candidates were in formation, that she was on board with this and that this wasn't going to be causing any problem, with our marriage. And so they had to write handwritten letters and all this type of stuff. So between the interviews and all the letters we had to write, plus the kind of oversight by Deacon Ben, who, was in charge of our formation, and the deacon director, if there was ever, any indication that there's something wrong,
Yeah.
then they would drill down into that. So,
Good. That's
yeah,
good. That's really
and
good.
in
Yeah.
our diocese, we had seminarians. I think two of them fairly recently in the last 4 years, and they were I think a year away from being ordained as transitional deacons, and then a year later they would be ordained as priests. But something happened, and all of a sudden, they're not in the program anymore. And it seemed like it was something on the diocese side that they, detected something.
Yeah.
So, and you're within a year of, you probably did in 4 years, put in 4 years of seminary, and now that's kind of a, I wouldn't say scary, but disappointing
Sure.
if when that would happen. So
But God, yeah, but that's the beauty of it. So I've come across a number of men that were in the seminary in their, I guess, mid-20s for years, and then realized it wasn't right, or someone else realized it wasn't right. But what they learned in those years is fantastic. So the
hmm,
theology, let's say, what you've mentioned, maybe the element of service has carried, has really stuck with them. So I think that's pretty cool. So you were ordained this summer, is that right?
yes, July 8th, this past, it's about 3 months ago now. Yeah, and what a wonderful day that was. Had family come in. I through all these years of service and stuff, especially with Knights of Columbus and the Acts. I've done many Acts teams. I won't tell you a number. I don't even know if I know the number anymore, but it's a lot of them. I got to know a lot of people in the diocese, in the state, and anyway, there were a lot of people there supporting me, that which was beautiful. Just being we're at the cathedral in Norwich, Connecticut, St. Patrick Cathedral, not the one in New York City, in Norwich, Connecticut. It's still very beautiful, and they recently renovated it, and you get up in that sanctuary with the bishop. Was an amazing, emotional, spiritual experience. Um, Two people gave me advice before the ordination, and he said, "Don't worry about where you're supposed to stand, what you're supposed to do. There will be people there that will tell you all that stuff if you forget or whatever. Don't worry about that. Just experience the a moment." And that was great advice. And so I had to lay down on the marble ground floor there, and while they prayed the litany, um, and you kneel in front of the bishop 3 times. Um, Once you got your hands in prayer, he puts his hands around, and that's when you promise obedience to the bishop and his successors. There's another time when he actually ordains you. You kneel in front of him, and he puts his hand on your head, and it's a quiet prayer. He prays in silently. Um, and the last time is he gives you the book of the Gospels, and you say, receive the gospel, whose herald you now are. Let's see if I get it
Wow.
right. Uh, you know, uh, Believe what you read, teach what you believe. Uh, yeah, teach what you believe and practice what you teach. Something like that. I probably should know it by heart, but
No,
yeah,
that sounds unbelievable. Oh my gosh. That must have been so, yeah, like you said, emotional, spiritual. Um, and then what has it been like the first few months now serving the church in that capacity?
oh, awesome, amazing experience, and it just continues. Uh, I'll say that, of course, serving at Mass, you're right there while the priest is consecrating the Eucharist. The Holy Spirit comes down, and priest acting in the person of Christ. So just uh, purifying the vessel, preparing the altar, all the different tasks that the deacon is responsible for. Just kind of front and center there. It's just amazing. It just makes the Mass alive. Proclaiming the gospel when a deacon is there at the Mass. Or if there's multiple, it's one of the deacons is responsible to proclaim the gospel. Preaching every once in a while. I've preached a few times. About once a month is the schedule that my pastor has given us. So I really enjoy that. I like to bring in some experiences that I have in life, as well as think popular culture things, maybe books or music and things like that people can relate to. And but I think one of the greatest things to do, I've done 4 of them, and that is baptisms. It's intimate, it's smaller event but you're actually playing being a key instrument for God to save a soul. You know, uh, with forgiveness of sin, forgiveness of original sin. Of course, these little babies, young children, don't have any sin other than original sin, but bringing them in and make them part of the family of God, share the divinity of Christ. It's just an amazing experience, and it's joyful. The family's joyful, um, and that's probably the best experience, I think.
That's amazing. Based on what we covered as far as having that long period of being lukewarm and then eventually doing the perpetual adoration, signing up for that with your wife, and then doing the Acts retreat, and then here becoming a deacon. If you were to speak to anyone, and I'm sure you speak to a lot of them that are lukewarm, or you can sense that they just don't understand the depth of the faith or the gravity of the faith, what advice would you give them?
Well, the advice would I'd give them to. Well, I'll say 2 things. One is work on uh, forming your faith, and I want to talk about my deacon ministry with that. But the other thing is to do things to develop a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and whether that's through adoration or prayer. Um, I'll go touch on that right now. Is for example, I teach confirmation students now. They're in preparation for receiving uh, confirmation, and that's a 2-year process. And you know, I've heard people say, "Oh, well, confirmation is like graduation, where they get confirmed and you never see them again." I don't know if that's your experience or if you've seen that, but a lot of
Yes,
times so it shouldn't. It obviously isn't confirmation, isn't like a graduation, but that's kind of the thing. And I recently realized that I got to get these children, these young adults, to their high school to develop that personal relationship to with Jesus. So rather than just teaching all the facts and figures that, is in the book that not that I don't do that, or we don't do that. And we have a team of catechists doing this, but a big emphasis is on things like prayer. We'll do adoration as part of our class from time to time, but really trying to get the students to get that good prayer life started, and through that, they could, and adoration, they could develop that relationship. Going back to my deacon ministry, each deacon is assigned two things when they're ordained. They receive, orders, and holy orders. It really is orders, and they come in writing. Here's your orders from the bishop, and one is a parish assignment where you're going to work with a particular parish and help, do masses and things like that, baptisms like that. The other is a ministry, some other work that you're going to do. Sometimes it's like a soup kitchen or prison ministry or something like that. That's just some examples of some of the other guys I know. I wanted to be involved with the Knights of Columbus and specifically forming their faith. So my assignment is to work with the state of Connecticut, State Council, Knights of Columbus, on forming faith. And we have a new initiative came from Supreme. It's called CORE. And what CORE is, it's Latin for heart, and the word core is the root of the word courage. But the mechanics of this is about starting events, core, I'll call it gatherings. They don't want us to call it meetings, but essentially it's a meeting, where you focus on three things: prayer, and significant prayer, not just a brief opening and closing prayer. Maybe it's adoration, or maybe it's a mass, or maybe a rosary with intentions or something like that. So prayer, formation, faith formation, some form of faith formation, very flexible. We're using right now the Into the Breach program that the Knights of Columbus puts out, and then fraternity, which is one of the other principles of the Knights of Columbus, and it's fraternity. Oh, well, just have some time. We get pizza or coffee and donuts and stuff like that, and time just to be together as buddies and whatnot. And this is open to all men of the parish. So my responsibility as my ministry is to get these cores implemented in councils throughout the state of Connecticut. So to kind of get back to answer your question, is just a quick summary is: one, form your faith. That's the advice I would give people, and maybe get involved in one of these core things or something, and a good prayer life to help you develop that personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Maybe the last thing would be is the sacraments. Make yourself available to the sacrament of the Eucharist. Go to Mass at least weekly. If you can do daily, that's even better. That's when we're getting the graces that help us, and also a good habit of going to reconciliation. I recommend at least monthly reconciliation. So those are the kind of bits of advice I tend to give people.
No, I really appreciate it. Fantastic answer. Means a lot, and I'm sure it'll help a lot of the listeners as well. Deacon Dave, I want to thank you for your witness. I want to thank you for saying yes to the diaconate. It's a big deal, and the church, the diocese around the country surely appreciate the diaconate. And again, I want to thank you. Keep up the good work. I'll be praying for you. And
thank you.
Everyone, thank you for watching. Thank you so much for your support. And until next time, take care and God bless.